Now, good afternoon. I'm here to talk to you about temperament. Now, if anybody's unsure what temperament is, hopefully by the end of this presentation you'll have a clearer understanding. So to look at temperament, we need to go right back as far as we can with music history. And this starts in the prehistoric era. Some 44,000 years ago, some archaic bone flutes have been found. Now, it's speculative as to how these are tuned, but they must have been tuned somehow. That's all we can tell you about that so far. But this is the earliest example of instrumentation with some kind of fixed tuning system. Following on from that, we have Sumerian Tablets. Now, it's speculated that these Sumerian Tablets, they contain the first example of notation and how to translate that, but there's been so many different contradicting theories on how to translate it that it's still unreliable as how we got to where we are. A little bit later in the Sumerian period, there was a documentation of something called Orion hymn number 6, which is apparently the first documentation of melody. But again, it's quite speculative because we don't have reliable information. The first real step towards tuning and temperament came in the ancient Greek period. Now, I'm sure a few of you, if not all of you, have heard of Pythagoras of Samos, a very famous mathematician and philosopher. Is responsible for a lot of stuff that's still taught in schools today, like the theory of triangles, pi 3.14, and all that kind of stuff. Now, Pythagoras, he formed with his peers the Pythagorean Brotherhood. Now, Pythagorean Brotherhood saw mathematics as the link between humans and the cosmos, man and God. And it was with the Pythagorean Brotherhood that they worked with music, thinking that the harmonies and music and tonality was that missing link between man and God, and through deciphering music through mathematics they could be closer to God. Because of this, Pythagoras got regarded as a seer more than anything, and from this came Music of the Spheres, which is quite a famous piece of work. There's plenty of books and documentation out there on that. So how did Pythagoras come up with what would become temperament today? Well, looking at music and mathematics, he started to see naturally occurring harmonious ratios. Now, rumour has it that he was listening to swordsmiths banging away, making swords one day, and he noticed how some of the chings of the hammers sounded good with others, some sounded not so good. This was what he was experiencing was dissonance and harmony. So, being a mathematical genius that he was, he thought, how can I look into this further? So, looking at the naturally occurring harmonious ratios, he took one length of string, which would be the unison with a ratio of 1 to 1. Now, he discovered that if you took a string half the length and plucked it, they'd have a ratio of 2 to 1, and that would be the octave. That's how we get an octave on a guitar. If you go up to the 12th fret, which is halfway up the string, you will get an octave higher, and so on and so forth. So, being in the naturally occurring harmonious series, he went further, and he applied a ratio of 3 to 2. So this would be 2/3 the size of the original string, and that creates the perfect fifth. Now, the perfect fifth is what all temperament used in the Western world today is based upon. What Pythagoras did was he stacked fifths, and then another fifth, then another fifth, and from each point that he came to, he kept stacking the fifths. Now, I've got a short little video here to sort of explain that a little bit easier. It's quite a tricky subject to do without visuals. So.
And that's the foundation, or the base of our spiral.
So that's the root
By
now.
dividing that first piece of metal by 2/3, we were able to create a perfectly tuned new note. Call it yellow.
So that's the first
That
fifth.
goes in a bit higher up. The pitch of the sound dictates its exact position in the spiral. By dividing yellow by 2/3, we can create a third note, higher still and further round, and so on and so forth into an infinite spiral of new notes. The mathematical distance between them makes a rather satisfying shape. With the 12th note in position, you can see from above a pattern emerging with the notes roughly spaced around the circle of the octave. But when you get to the 13th note, it all goes horribly wrong, which I can show you if I collapse the model. Because the 13th note wants to shove the first note out of the way.
Okay, so you can see there how the fifths have been stacked. And it's interesting that the first 12 notes out there are the 12 notes of the chromatic scale. Now if we look at these diagrams, you can see how if you carry on going round in fifths, it is an endless spiral. Now as we know, we have this Pythagorean Comma where on the 13th it doesn't line up, and this causes all sorts of problems later on. If you were to continue round the spiral, you get into enharmonics, and you'd first of all have E sharp but not F, and then you'd have B sharp but not C, and then carrying on further you get flat flats and sharp sharps, and then flat flat flats and sharp sharp sharps, and so on. So you can see how confusing and how much of a problem this Pythagorean comma causes. So it became known as the dreaded Pythagorean comma. The next step towards temperament, bearing in mind that Pythagorean work was basically on tuning, nothing had been tempered. Tempered was the adjustment of these notes, the adjustment of the 12 notes in the spiral. John Dunstable, he was a major player, very influential. He was regarded as the most influential British composer before the Beatles. So that's quite an accolade to have. What John Dunstable did was, he introduced the thirds. Bearing in mind Pythagoras was born on fifths, so music played up till then was basically monotone, or simple two-note chords of the root and the fifth, which is what we know today as the power chord. The third, it wasn't in the harmonic series with the way it went round the spiral, so Dunstable, he wasn't stuck with a fixed tuning system. He didn't have instruments that he had to stick to because it was choral choir music, so just by slightly adjusting the vocals as they were singing, they would be able to temper. I've got a short example coming here of a piece written by Dunstable. There's three voices, and as the voices become introduced, you can hear how these three build up triads. This is the first example of the major and minor triad, which is so prevalent throughout music theory and music history today. It sounds to me like there's an organ or an instrument in the background there, but it's not. That is purely all vocal music, and you can hear how the three voices have built up to make a chord. So yeah, John Dunstable was very influential. Following on from the medieval to Renaissance period was Johann Sebastian Bach. We all know Johann is very famous throughout the musical world. He took Dunstable's work further, and he used to play an instrument called a clavier, which is simple, similar to a piano kind of thing. You have a keyboard and strings inside. And he tempered each individual string, and with this work, he came up with works called the Well-Tempered Clavier, which was 12 fugues, 12 preludes in 12 keys that could all be played in one sitting, without having to make any readjustments or temperings. This wasn't quite the 12th tone equal temperament we use today, but it was a huge leap towards. After Bach's work, it wasn't really until the Victorian era and the Industrial Revolution humanity went through a huge leap in its evolution during this period because of the technological advancements, precision engineering. For the first time, we were able to equally divide the octave precisely using the new tools. And out of this era came the accordion. He's back.
I was waiting for it, I knew it was coming.
So the accordion, it comes from the Italian word accordare, which means to tune. So basically accordion does mean tuned. It was the first 12 tone equal temperament instrument, and it's from this instrument that we have our guitar and piano tunings that we use all the way throughout the musical world today. Now the accordion really cemented 12 tone equal temperament into European music through gypsy travelling bands. These bands that go all over Europe, and there were traditional musicians with their traditional instruments. But with the accordion being such a dominant, brash, at the forefront kind of instrument, the traditional musicians had no choice but to temper their instruments to play alongside the accordion. And ever since then we've had 12 tone equal temperament. Now you can see here how the octave is split, and each interval exactly 100 cents, so you get to 1200 cents of the octave, and it's all uniform. Now in comparison to the previous just intonations of the Pythagorean tuning, you can see how some of these intervals come quite far away, like 15 there, 13 there, from the original harmonic series. So because of this, we're losing the overtones. With the 12-tone equal temperament, we're losing the overtones in the harmonic series that was originally there. Now it's interesting looking at this, that the perfect fourth and the perfect fifth are only 1.96 away, which is only a very small amount, which is where we get the term perfect fourth and perfect fifth on, because they're the only two intervals that are so close to the original harmonic series. So, ever since the introduction of 12-tone equal temperament, musicians and great minds of Western civilization have tried to figure out how can we reintroduce the harmonic series. Now, bearing in mind this was in the 19th century that we lost this overtone series, it's debatable whether we would know what it's supposed to sound like, because for hundreds of years we've had 12-tone equal temperaments, so do we really know what we're missing? It's kind of like if a tree falls in the woods, does it make a sound? So, but there's been many solutions. There's been Tom Stone's interchangeable intonation system, but to make a key change you have to take the fretboard on, put a new one on, and all sorts of solutions, but there's been nothing really to tackle until recently. Over the last few years, the Fiddle True Temperament system has started appearing on the market. It's got endorsements by well-known people such as Steve Vai, a few other musicians in rock bands. The djent genre goes a lot into True Temperament. Now, it is claimed that this system is built on 12-tone equal temperament, but rather than tempering everything, just individual notes are brought slightly away to try and reintroduce the naturally occurring harmonic series. Now, my task for the investigative part of the dissertation is to make comparisons between Fidel's True Temperament system and the standard 12-tone equal temperament system we have today. So there we go. I hope you understand a little bit more about temperament now. And if you have any questions, fire away.
Any questions, guys? Wow.
I was trying to think of one, but you've kind of explained it all.
Do you understand it now? Because it's quite a complicated theory.
Yeah, it's very good. Yeah.
What do you think you'll find from your second study? What results do you
Good
reckon?
question.
Yes, well, in fact, I don't personally think that the Fiddle formula is going to be that much different to 12-tone equal temperament. When we compared the just intonation to the equal temperament, you could see some of the intervals were 13, 14, 15 cents out. The maximum amount of cents that True Temperament is out is 4 cents. So it's debatable whether we could even conceive or hear a 4 cent difference. You know, it's like the perfect fourth and perfect fifth are almost 2 cents away, and they're perfect, so is 4 going to really make much of a difference? And especially when you're layering 3 or 4 or even 5 notes into a chord. But you know, I've got some experiments ready, and at some point I'll get you all to have a listen and make some comparisons. So, but in my opinion, I don't think there's going to be that much. I think this Fiddle formula is a bit avant-garde, it's a bit musically, you know, oh yeah, well this is better, or but I don't think there's a great deal of difference, to be honest. So, okay.
Well done.